And okay, recording. I've got to click a button for that. So we're here. Somebody's not muted.
Yes, mute and turn off your.
In fact, I am going to do the same thing so I don't get distracted. I'm going to hide behind the curtain, just like the Wizard of Oz, okay? Hopefully not quite as phony. And Susan, can I go share screen now? Oops, she's muted. We shall try it.
I can't unmute myself. Yes, share the screen.
Okay, so I am. Okay.
Okay.
We're cooking. Does everything look good at your end?
Everything looks good, and I'm.
All right. Well, okay. As I was saying, we're here in our shared love of rivers and the feel of riding on that awesome power of a river, whether it be a little creek or the surf in the ocean or the Grand Canyon. Now, that's what we have in common. From there, we kind of diverge. I mean, not big time. Some of us may just want to go spend a day down there surfing a wave down at Angler's End. Maybe somebody else would like to disappear for weeks at a time in the boundary waters, immersing themselves in wilderness. We all sort of have our special way. Well, for me, my goal is to explore. I just love to see new stuff. And my long and pathetic attempt to see the world through its rivers, well, it's been rewarding, let me tell you. But what gives me the most satisfaction is finding gems in places where people don't normally look, like finding whitewater in Illinois. Oh, by the way, I have. So it was inevitable that I would have to check out the rivers of the Iberian Peninsula, a place with plenty of identity, but not a place most associate with river paddling. So, like my feathered friends, listen to what I have to say. The Iberian Peninsula is that squarish lower corner of Europe occupied by Spain and Portugal. It has plenty of rivers, and since the land is more mountainous than not, there would certainly be potential for white water. And let me be clear, listen to me. Contrary to what we were taught, the rain in Spain does not fall mainly on the plain. It falls instead as rain or snow on the mountains. And that, my friends, is a recipe for good paddling. Well, I am certainly no authority on the region, and most of this evening's talk will focus on a visit I took in 2006. Unlike most of my solo trips, the itinerary was diverse. I had over 4 weeks planned, but it was split in two. For the first half, I would paddle like crazy, bagging as many rivers as I could. Then my partner, Carol, would join me, and we would tour by auto and on foot like any other tourist. Both would be an interest. Very exciting. Now, you may be curious about the logistics. Those were the good old days. My go-to airlines was British Air. Not only did they carry my beloved C1 with no protest, but often a smile and a courteous treatment to the staff at the check-in, and they would wave me through without even extra charges. Also, they were using bigger jets then for connecting flights. So flying with my 4-meter-long boat from DC to London to Madrid worked just fine. As with most European excursions, I found that having a good paddling guidebook could save a lot of pain and heartbreak. My go-to reference was the German Canoe Federation's guidebook series. Well, but before getting into the details of this trip, just a quick recall of my first attempts to sample Spain. The year was 1987, and I was exploring rivers in the south of France with a friend named Sally. When we reached the Pyrenees, I suggested we cross the mountains and see what Spain had to offer. So we wandered around the Pyrenees, sampling such gems as the Rio Ara, the Rio Aragon, and the spectacular gorge of the Noguera Palaresa, with the surging wall-to-wall white water. Not a place to miss your roll. And then we moved west to a stranded massif called the Picos de Europa, with its deep gorges and delightful trout streams. And there lies the problem with paddling in Spain. Trout fishing is sacred, and there are many prime whitewater streams that are for anglers only. Paddlers stay away. It started with subtle signs, like fishermen running along the shores, cursing at us and throwing rocks. Then came the police. And that is where Sally really earned her keep. Speaking fluent Spanish, she managed to charm officer after officer into letting us pass. It was absolutely amazing. I will always be so grateful. So with that background, I hope you understand why I approached this return expedition with trepidation. The question, would it work on my own? Well, like I say, I had 2 weeks to paddle there like there was no tomorrow. While I scanned the guidebooks for what would be the prettiest runs and runs within my comfort level, it seemed as there are times when any blue line sporting runnable levels would do. I just wanted to sample the region's rivers badly. So on May 6, 2006, I plucked my boat from the baggage claim at Madrid Barajas Airport, rented a car, hit the road, and a short trip through the spring countryside brought me to the banks of the Rio Henares, flowing by Guadalajara. Not really much to this one. Good enough for a still jet-lagged paddler, though. But I sure could have done without the periodic gauntlet of thorn bushes that shrouded the path. One convenient feature, though, was that I could use the commuter train for a shuttle. You know, I think it was the same commuter train that made world news 2 years earlier when it was bombed and 130 people perished. This just goes to prove shuttling is just not for the faint of heart. Well, I then headed south to check out the Rio Teo, also known as the Tagus, a river made famous by the artist El Greco in his work, View of Toledo. Alas, I never had the time to paddle through the scene, but instead chose to check out the headwaters. And that was a good choice. I soon discovered the local boaters felt the same way. I went down and introduced myself and offered to join them, but they gave me the side eye, looking at this old fart in an old school C1, and could only assume the worst, and pointed me to an easier section of the river. I decided not to protest and ultimately had a fine time alone on this dramatic setting. Well, before I go on, let's get one thing perfectly clear. Yes, Spain and Portugal have lots of rivers, some really long ones at that. But they've dammed the heck of out of a lot of them, sometimes creating huge reservoirs. Add to that thousands of old mill dams and little power dams, and there's less to do than one would think. And adding to my challenge in 2006 was that they were in the middle of a really bad drought and those reservoirs were very low. Yet, as I will demonstrate, there was still plenty of joy to be had. This leads us to the next river, the Rio Cabriel, which flows into the Mediterranean Sea near Valencia. It was love at first sight, but I didn't jump right on. First, I poked around the countryside a bit first. And why not? The Mediterranean lands at this time of year are in full flower. It's just amazing. And of course, there are trees out there too, some of which are burdened by industrial grade mistletoe. I've never seen anything like it. And those countryside sometimes seem like wilderness. You never could seem to get away from that stray olive grove. But oh, that river, it just begged to be floated. Oh, Never have I so wanted to just jump on in and go to it. Oops. Well, I saw a sign for an outfitter called Kalahari. I went on, introduced myself to the owner, Antonio, and he was totally on board with my desire to see the river, not trying to get business or anything. And he suggested that one of his guides, Rafa, had tomorrow off and would be glad to join me for the fun. Wow, that just solved the challenging shuttle problem. Yes, sir. And even better, Rafa let me choose the itinerary. And I think he just slightly winced when I suggested a 36-mile run for the day. So we had a most delightful descent down a generally easy river. And that was fine with me because I wanted to see the joint, not be stricken with fear. But there were some splashy interludes and other interesting quirks, like where the whole river narrowed down so much that you could touch both sides with your arms, or at least your paddle. And as a canyon moderated, we even came upon an old Roman bridge. Now, I know I'm gloating, but I'll do it anyway. I should note that in an email exchange later, after the trip, Rafa commented that he had never been so sore as the day after our trip. Ah, kids nowadays. Anyway, I didn't have to go far to find another river, the Rio Júcar. I'm not sure why I chose it, since it wasn't in the guidebook, and that is always taking a chance. But the choice was good. The Júcar flows through a canyon and valley marked by very striated limestone. One interesting facet is that the locals exploit this geology to become semi-cliff dwellers. Darn, I never got an inside tour, so I don't know how they deal with the rough edges. Anyway, all that limestone, as you may have guessed, creates a ledgy river. I didn't have tons of water, but with those ledges coated by a thick, resilient moss, I'd never put so much as a scratch on my boat. And for those of you, I know there's some of you out there who just get really uptight about missing the takeout. No problem on the Júcar. Just look for the castle. And then you get out around the town, around the bend at the town. Well, I continued on south to the next major river, the Rio Segura. I was concerned. The river was just filled, brimming with fish, and they were all going upstream. I wanted to go down. What did they know that I didn't? Well, I had to go with plan. And my plan was to put in at the big dam. But the road to the bottom had a gate and a knocked over sign that said no trespassing. Or at least I didn't really understand Spanish, but I think that's what it said. On the other hand, the gate was ajar and nobody was around. So I unloaded fast, hid my car, and darted down the trail where I found no armed guards and was soon floating and free. Ah, free at last. Floating down another wonderful canyon with shady nooks clothed in maidenhair fern. Life was good. Well, you know, I really had no plan. I'm just not that type of person, and I corrected course every evening. So on impulse, I decided to head back to the center of the country. There's so much to see on the way. Funny thing, when most of us think of windmills, we think of Holland. But remember Don Quixote? Spain embraced wind power too, big time back in the day. And they do so now, even more. Oh, this probably doesn't turn your head, but back in 2006, for this American, that was quite progressive. Another takeaway was that I always imagined Spain to be this dry, brown, bleak place. Maybe it is, but not in the spring, when it is full of flowers, a friendly place, downright verdant. You could mistake it for Ireland. Even in this dry year, the mountains were coated with snow. I just wanted them to melt. Well, being so, because They needed some water in those reservoirs, not to mention the free-flowing rivers. Being dry was no surprise that the rivers were a bit rocky, like the Rio Alberche. But I slid down anyway in my glass boat, and believe it or not, with no damage. But I did do better on the Rio Tormes with this picturesque put-in path and enjoyed a delightful descent with very little trouble, just a few trouble spots. I recommend taking out at the old bridge. It's very easy. And so it was that I took leave of Spain now for the north of Portugal. My first target was the Rio Sabor, the country's last wild river, flowing free for 120 miles. But it was not described in the guidebook. Its wildness was spelled out, at least looking on the map, by very few access points. Well, with the prospect of hitchhike shuttle and lonely mountain roads and untold challenges on the river, I was faced with some choices. Well, one was going alpine style for a multi-day adventure, or two, try to do as many miles as possible as a day trip, or three, chicken out and just do the final 11 miles from one bridge that I could find on the map. Well, I chickened out. And I'll always second guess that decision as the dam builders came in a few years afterwards and destroyed the place. Oh, well, no second chance here. Even my adventure was a challenge. The map showed an obscure road into the canyon or valley from the village of Felgar. You wouldn't believe it. I just could not find the turnoff in the village. But wandering around town, a fellow who could tell I needed help leaned out his window and motioned for me to come on up into his home. He spoke no English. There we sat down in front of his computer and conversed using a translation app. Yeah, I know, this is no big deal today, but in 2006, this seemed like nothing less than magic. Wow. And so it was that I found my way to the riverbank, where I found a family living out of a van and a tent to watch my boat while I successfully hitchhiked my shuttle. The trip started off quietly enough, sometimes in quiet pools choked by flowering water weeds, beautiful, and they were infested by friendly turtles. The place turned out to be not a wilderness, but indeed remote, with those ubiquitous olive groves and livestock, but I was still okay. Soon enough, that quiet river took off downstream through the same sort of hard rock that, well, I'll tell you, you'd think you're in Mather Gorge. Some of you may wonder, well, why did I go 5,000 miles when I could have just gone down to Angler's Inn? I don't know, but I did. And it turned out the rapids were fine and the pools were fine, and it was a wonderful place to be. Such a shame that no one will ever see it again. Well, that was certainly satisfying. So I then moved west, no farther than over the mountain, to the next river, which is called the Rio Tua. Here, setting up shuttle was easy. Just take the train. And so I just paddled from station to station. The Tua had a fine gorge with good rock scenery, both high and low, and good rapids, both natural and man-made. So keeping the pattern going, again, westward I went to the next valley of the Rio Tomega. That river looked kind of mediocre to put in, but never trust first impressions. Don't you agree? Again, the valley transformed into a gorge with that same old rock and a lively gradient combined to form miles of good white water. The best spot there was an 8-foot drop with a sweet tongue. Everybody would want to run it. But before you do, consider that runoff from there smashed into a dreadfully undercut boulder. So I carried. The run finished at the beautiful old town of Amarante, where nature's rock was now replaced by man-made rock walls, slowly being reclaimed by nature, and where, like so many European towns, you might just share the water with aspiring slalom paddlers in training. But it was Amarante's downtown that really excelled. This is why you travel 5,000 miles for a river. Well, I'm a creature of habit, so again, I headed west, this time to catch a section of the Rio Minho, where it forms the Spanish-Portuguese border. Once again, a train made shuttling easy. This run starts at a big dam that blasts out lots of water as it generates electricity. The water twists and boils down a crooked course, rock-bound all the way, mostly natural, but punctuated by little stone towers that seem to be connected with some serious fishing activity, but I'm not sure. Well, my 2 weeks of river madness were coming to a close, so I swung back into northern Spain to catch a few more runs. One on the lovely Rio Esla in its rugged mountain setting, and the more mundane Rio Pisuerga, which, believe me, is still worth doing for its creative rock formations. So now it was time for a change. Let me introduce you to Carol. An uneventful flight delivered her to me, and so began the terrestrial leg of our journey. The focus would be on Portugal, covering as much territory as we could. But before saying goodbye to Spain, we set aside some time to visit Cordoba. Cordoba was a happening place. So many things to do. There were parties going on, but we were not invited. So we were happy to just visit the tourist highlights, like the Mezquita, a building that has served over the centuries as both a church and a mosque. And no visit here would be complete without a tour of the Alcázar de los Reyes Cristianos, a fortress and a palace, outstanding for its extensive gardens and ponds. And oh yes, topiary. Edward Scissorhands would have considered this place as heaven, don't you think? And again, the discovery that long ago the Spaniards used renewable power, in this case water power, to get their jobs done, showed this to be a very progressive country. But on to Portugal. The Rio Guadiana forms part of the southern border between these two countries. Oh, for just one more day to paddle one more river. Oh, but it was not to be. So I should stop griping. Now, Carol and I are pretty much on the same wavelength for travel style, but she still exerted some new influences on me, like staying in I'm so embarrassed to say this, a bed and breakfast the first evening in Portugal. I confess it was nice, but otherwise we stuck to rough camping, an illegal activity that we always found enjoyable. The southern end of Portugal is called the Algarve. Its interior is a rolling savanna-like landscape with lots of room to roam. Though I think it's supposed to be a well-watered region, it did have a desert feel at some times, many times. Well, one reward of wandering around this interior is that we found one of the region's many Neolithic remains. Oh, somebody's not muted. Well, it's pretty clear why they call it the Stone Age anyway. And they were already designing some very interesting kayak forms, as you can see. The pace of life around here is slow, as evidenced by dogs being unconcerned about sleeping in the deserted streets. We enjoyed being there, but most people visit this region for its coast, a resort-laden and well-populated reach, but with its charms. In spite of all that development, there remain some lonely beaches. And they're good beaches for beachcombing. Hey, have you ever seen a cuttlefish? I've eaten one in a Portuguese restaurant, of course. On their fringe, the dunes support more desert-like plants, but that makes sense to me here, okay? And of course, the sea is also a resource. So you'll find places where they extract its salt. And there must be something of value in those tidal estuaries, which in most places are nurseries for fisheries. By visiting a local fish market, we know that the sea here is full of fish and all sorts of other edible creatures. And this historically seafaring nation has long known how to get them. Of course, most of the coast is well populated, but with some charming little towns like Lagouche, where we got our first exposure to the Portuguese love of tiles and their architecture. But oh, you may think I'm silly, but what I most remember from Lagouche are the blasphemous seagulls. Every one of them will rot in hell for what they did. If you can picture it, we are now in the southwesternmost tip of Europe, and those sandy beaches were on the leeward side. But this all transforms to rocky ramparts necessary to thwart the power of the angry Atlantic on the windward side. But what really impressed me was that this long settled land had so many miles of wild seashore, no piers, no condominiums, no Ferris wheels, just wild wilderness. It was wonderful. But let's leave the ocean now. Let's head inland and northward, first through forests infested with flocks of storks, then down quiet country lanes past oak forest. But listen, this is not just any oak. These are cork oaks. And we were fortunate enough to observe the harvest ritual, which is accomplished, would you believe this, with axes, special designed axes. Amazingly, this process does not kill the tree. And if I got it straight, I seem to recall that it takes 6 years to grow the bark back and the cycle continues. Oh, if there's such a thing as reincarnation, please don't let me be reincarnated as an oak tree. It sounds like torture. Well, moving inland, this region, which is called the Alentejo, one would want to visit Evora with its Roman ruins and fortress-like cathedral. But still, save some time just to aimlessly wander its streets. You'll find lots of beautiful spots there. And even those with a more modern touch are interesting. And perhaps, did you ever consider stopping and shopping for a new suit? There's a place I can recommend. As for me, not finding anything in Gore-Tex or neoprene, I left empty-handed. Well, let's move on to Lisbon now. This has to be one of my favorite cities. But first, you might just want to get settled in. Doesn't that make sense? Well, for us, it was camping with the rest of the lowlifes in the campground in a huge municipal park on the west side of the city. Yeah, I know the ambiance is not great, but the price was right. And the place had a restaurant, a swimming pool, and most importantly, a bus stop to easily access downtown. What more could one want? So let's go downtown, where, as expected, one would find a nice plaza. But in Lisbon, you get your choice of two of them. On the other plaza, creative tiling creates an optical illusion sufficient to make you seasick. Wouldn't it be a hoot to pave a section of the Beltway like that one night before April Fool's Day? Yeah. Of course, tromping around these plazas can get hot, in which case you might want to get relief in the nearest fountain. But let's keep moving, okay? Because downtown is a happening place with this strange viewing tower, music in the streets, strange street art, and more conventional art. And be sure to duck into some of the specialty shops. Can you imagine one devoted entirely to sardines? Well, we saw it. Well, back into the streets. Just immerse yourself in the architecture. You know, this town was totally flattened in 1755 by an earthquake. So everything you see is new, well, by European standards. And of course, you can count on seeing many more examples of those wonderful tiles. Even though it's a busy city, it's not all crowded there. You can find a quiet spot where you can sit and play your music to nobody. Count on it. Now, Lisbon is built on a bunch of hills. If scaling them wears you out, don't worry, you can always take the trolley. And you wander around these streets long enough, and you will inevitably come upon a street market where you can find anything you need, really anything. And when these hours of walking leave you famished, there just seems to be no limit to the selection of fine restaurants. Ah, yes, the adventure of dealing with new, unfamiliar languages. Well, finally, no tour of Lisbon would be complete without an excursion to nearby Sintra, where somebody built a completely outrageous complex of castles known as the Palacio Nacional da Pena, which to me, this is just my opinion, but this to me proves that some folks just have too much money. But it's interesting as a tourist. And while you're there, you do want to take time to visit the nearby Parc de Pena, which will save you a trip to New Zealand or California or someplace like that. Ah, this is just too much stimulation. It was time for we country folk to return to the countryside in a simpler life. And with that, let's head on up into the Serra da Estrela, which is located midway up Portugal. And at about 6,000 feet, they're the highest mountains in Portugal. Much of this range is within the bounds of a natural park. That's what they call it, which is a place preserving both the traditional rural life and nature. Of course, we were out for nature and looking for wide open spaces. And for that, it was provided in the high country, a boulder-strewn landscape. And I mean boulder-strewn, where only the toughest plant life can survive. Yet now, with the snow gone and the warm spring sun, even there, flowers thrive. It was very pretty. Some parts of that landscape tell us that at one time glaciers bulldozed through here. All other places were rough and crumpled. And just always loved those high country ponds and lakes. Well, having enjoyed our wild interlude, we left the mountains and headed back to the lowlands and a visit to the old university town of Coimbra, where nearby you will find Portugal's finest Roman ruins. Let me tell you, they are extensive to say the least. And if anything, this place might suggest where the Portuguese acquired their taste for tiles. Definitely, they must have been good teachers. And make no mistake about it, this is a work in project. Discovery continues. Well, while this Roman stuff may seem old to you, there's older stuff here too. You remember those Neolithic ruins I showed before. But let's go now to a little town called Villanova de Fazcoa. A few decades ago, up in the overly dammed valley of the Rio Douro, the power company planned yet another dam. But in doing their environmental studies required beforehand, the scientists discovered what is flouted as the world's largest outdoor display of Paleolithic art. So activists actually succeeded in stopping the dam mid-construction forever, hopefully. Today, we tourists can visit the site, transported in small groups in four-wheel drive vehicles, and carefully shepherded by guides. I have to admit, it's a little subtle at first, but after a while, you start figuring out the patterns and realize this place is really littered with these engravings. And again, this is all tightly managed to assure that no fool will add their contemporary artwork. But let's go check in Portugal's second largest city, Porto. Porto is a town of maybe 250,000 people, perched on steep bluffs above the estuary of the River Douro. For most of us, is known as a source of port wine. As usual, We drove just to the edge of the city, and then we took advantage of their mass transit, in this case, a sparkling new metro system, one that I really liked because it can accommodate so many needs. Well, speaking of trains, this town has an outstanding train station. And I say that because it is decorated both outside and in with just amazing art. Just beautiful. Hard to get to the train on time there. My favorite was the locomotive clock. Oh, I'd love to have that in my house. I thought this was all pretty good art too, as apparently did one art student. The city crams together as much as possible in a tight space. Nothing here is plain. Everything is fancy. Even McDonald's is done up special. And let me tell you, people, when it's time to fill my meds, I will go to the Farmacia Moreno before CVS any day. Did you know this is the birthplace? This town is the birthplace of Henry the Navigator? Remember him from high school history? Oh, you don't? I know what you were doing. As usual, I enjoy just wandering around and viewing the everyday world in these old cities. You know, even neglect and decay can be pretty in a place like this. But this is a river town and a port, and you know I gravitate to water. It's certainly a great destination for bridge lovers, so much to study. The other side of the river from downtown Porto is the center of the wine industry, and it's lined by old warehouses. And the quay is lined by old wine barges, which are now tourist boats. Beautiful craft. And you may be wondering, could I go paddling there? Yep, recreational boating is perfectly okay. Well, leaving Porto, I just had to show Carol that beautiful town, Amarante, that I paddled through earlier in the month on the Rio Tomega. You remember it? So we got there late in the day and dined in a lovely restaurant with a terrace overlooking the river. And you know, afterwards, a classy fellow would probably have taken her to a show. But I'm even more classy than that. And instead, I took her to the carnival. Yeah! So much fun to be had at a place like that. Oh boy, time was trickling away. So for a last fling, we swung back into northern Spain for an all too brief visit to that isolated range of mountains called the Picos de Europa. Remember, I mentioned doing that in 1987. Well, this place is a wonderful mix of traditional mountain villages, yawning chasms, whitewater rivers, countless paths to follow to explore the place. It's really sort of like the Alps, but much less known, much less visited, much less developed. Oh, I do hope I have a chance to go back there and explore more. Well, by the time we got done there, the clock had really run out. So we hurried back to Madrid, getting there late in the evening. And because we would leave on a red eye the next morning, we just pulled into the parking lot late and slept in the garage in our car at the airport. This was the same parking garage that was bombed several months later. Just goes to show timing is everything. Well, you know, that's about all I have to say. I really hope I impressed you with all this place has to offer. And I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. So with that, I'll just say thank you. Oh yeah, and credit to Carol for taking a lot of the pretty pictures on the part where we were together. And that is the end. So I will stop share. And I will make myself visible again. And if anyone has any questions, I'll try.
Fantastic pictures, Ed.
Oh,
Really
thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
behalf
very
of Carol.
beautiful.
Well, did I tell everything? I can't believe.
People, you are probably muted, so if you're trying to talk, check your mute.
Or, oh, we have the chat. Why don't I do it scientifically? Sardines, bravo. No questions, just comments.
Yeah, what do you mean the sardines? We're weird. Hi, look who I dragged. Look who I
Well,
dragged in.
you need that omega-3 to keep up the pace.
I
on this
know. I
stuff.
eat a lot of sardines. I love sardines.
Well, that's good.
Cheap, easy, I'd love to cook salmon every night, but it doesn't happen. So, but it was
How about
That was
cuttlefish?
wonderful.
I recommend
Yeah.
cuttlefish.
Okay, you're on. So, but thank you. That was
It was
really
nice.
fun.
Really impressed.
I hope
Yeah,
you do
you're
more of
welcome.
these.
No more questions. Let's see. Still no more questions. You can't believe everything I say, really.
When are we
Did you
going back?
Yeah.
when Lisbon gets its first vegetarian restaurant.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I had a lot of lettuce and French fries there.
Yeah, Carol, do you want to offer any insight into the trip? Yeah, you can say bad
No.
things about me. That's okay.
No, you just made me laugh a few times up here. I'm glad you couldn't hear it in the basement. So, no, very good commentary. It was a wonderful trip. I forgot how beautiful it was there. So, good job, Ed.
And what was the
I do
food
have
like?
a question, Ed. I'm just curious, like with some of these rivers that maybe aren't regularly paddled, how do you, when you're across the big pond, how do you find out, how do you get enough information so that you know where to go when you get there? Where do you look to do that research?
A lot of what I have done is thanks to that guidebook I showed at the very beginning.
The German one? Yeah,
The
okay.
Germans travel and they have a series of guidebooks. I'd say about 7 or 8 volumes that cover everything from Russia to Portugal, Scandinavia, Turkey. And it's not that I speak very good German or read very good German, but I have learned, well, first of all, guidebook writers are functionally illiterate. So basically they have a vocabulary of about 100 words. So if you can learn 100 key words, you can decipher an awful lot from a guidebook. So I use these things. The problem is that they have an awesome amount of information. If you want to paddle rivers closer to Germany, it got a little bit thin in Spain. So that's why well, every now and then I just chafe and I have to improvise. And I get burned sometimes too. In this case, I got off okay. But I'm crying in my oatmeal, not doing more of the Rio Sabor.
There's a few more comments in there with questions.
Yes, let's see. They let vegetarians in the country. Carol would say no.
They just don't feed them, that's all.
Let's see, did you do this whole trip without a car? Oh my goodness. No, I rented, in those days I rented a car and that worked fine. We didn't kill each other. What you saw is actually a pretty roomy little car. And where and when is your next presentation? I don't know, when somebody invites me to do one. Here I have power as a program chair. I could just schedule myself every month. Carol may be my only audience, so.
Oh, no.
As much as you travel, Ed, I think you could do one every month.
Oh my. Maybe next year, let's see, what's this? That's their evil plan. Don't know how there can be anything without Hamon. Hamon, sorry, Hamon. Sometimes I forget what language I'm trying to live with.
Did you ever do one of your trip to France?
Well, I have a 1987 trip to France that I'm trying to digitate and bring up. Digitize.
Digitize.
I told you, we guidebook writers are functionally illiterate. I've been to France a number of times and have tons of images and tons of stories, but I really think my first impression in '87 would make the best. And at some point, I'm going to force that on somebody. So,
That'd be great.
yeah, France is a great place. And anybody who wants to know about it, feel free to contact me direct. You can go there without a boat and still have a good time, just in the rentals.
Someone just asked on the chat if this would be available online. The answer is yes. It's being recorded and it'll be posted on CCA's YouTube channel.
Very good, Susan. And by the way, sort of along that line, somebody asked, can you tell a newbie about the canoe club? Oh, can we tell you? Come closer into our lair. No, really, it's a low-key club. It doesn't, we have no infrastructure. We're just a bunch of people that have a lot in common. That's why the name association popped up. Because we do the river and the water so many different ways. And we have a schedule and we have these wonderful shows. So there's no reason not to become part of our community. Let's see. Did you end all of your river trips in the daylight?
What? What'd you say?
The person who asked that has been scarred with some bad experiences and still obviously suffers PTSD. So I should just ignore that. But, I think I did. I'm a lot more careful on these foreign trips because when you get screwed up, there's less of a safety net. I mean, I got lost on a river near Paris a number of years ago. It's hard to believe you're lost, and that's the story for another day. But I climbed out at a farm. The guy's trying to tell me that I'm at the put-in. I'd gone around in a circle, and I didn't understand him. And we were about ready to come to blows because I was getting so irritated with this joker. So it's best to be conservative on these trips. Somebody said, believe it or not, I have paddled in France, the Ardèche and the Somme. Everybody should paddle the Ardèche. So did I miss anybody's comments?
Well, one person asked if CCA had trips and stuff online. Yes, canoecruisers.org, or just Google canoe cruisers.
And somebody here said rivers look fairly clean. Oh God, some of those are very clean. These were limestone rivers a lot of times, or coming out of the bottom of reservoirs. Yeah, it wasn't exactly my stereotype, but they commented not like the one that comes out of Andorra. I have paddled some of that river, and the easiest part of the river is class 3, and then it just goes up, 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 up. Getting death by pollution is the least of your worries when you try paddling in Andorra. Oh, I can't, let's see. What other destinations are on your list as potential next? Well, I'm not sure. The pandemic has thrown a monkey wrench into my life. So there's a good chance if I ever get on track, it's going to be something very conservative, like going back to France again. I just can't seem to get enough of that country. What was the little boat you use? I thought you got an inflatable. No, most, and I see who made this. Kate, in the paddling community, my boat is considered a pig. People look at it and just can't believe somebody paddles something that big. Inflatable is in my future though, because no airline will carry my boat anymore. So Carol and I just bought a pack raft, and there's a good chance my boat's going to be in my luggage in the future. Je parle français? Just saying. Je ne parle pas bien français bien. but I get by.
Seriously, Ed? Oh, he's reading
I
it.
think he's reading.
I heard it seriously.
Okay, it's Jan and Jan Paul. Did you ever rent equipment over there, or did you always take your boat and rent the car or buy the car?
Let me tell you, in this wide world, finding another old school Han C1 like I paddle is
Okay.
not likely, even though I did find one time, but it's not outfitted for me. So my first European trip, I flew with my boat and left it there for a number of years until it
Oh, wow.
crumbled. And then things got easy with the airlines. And for many years, I was able to fly with my boat. And the party's over now. So
When did that, how, and I'm just curious, do you have any idea why they stopped it, or do we have to assume?
the airlines just need all that space to,
Yeah.
air freight's
Okay.
valuable. So if they don't have to carry my boat, they can carry something and
That's-
make a lot more money.
Yeah.
Well,
like a
they've
tube-
also gone to compartments that they pack the luggage in, and then they
Right.
load the whole container
Yeah.
into the, and they're
Right.
not big enough for Ed's canoe. So
So you'd have to cut it in half and take it in two separate pieces.
yeah,
And that was my remark I made about the good old days. Nowadays, no problem getting across the Atlantic. Those are big jets, but the connecting flights are on small jets, and they cannot accommodate the boat.
So,
But
that why-
back in 2006, they were using Boeing 757s, 767s, and I learned to check all these things out and find out what the capacity was.
yeah.
So the traveler.
Uh-huh. Cool, thank you.
Oh, sure. Anything else? Oh, not outed for you. You mean it had a seat?
Yeah.
No, man, we're very sensitive about how we are fitted in our boats there. Just 1 inch lower on the floor can just turn a C1 from a torture device into a torture device.
Yeah.
Hey, Ed,
Mac Thornton, yes.
how is your paddling alone on that? It looked like some of it was class 3, 4, maybe, consistent with the AWA safety code about paddling alone on water like that.
Well, that's why I get abroad. It's American whitewater. I paddle where it's a suicide whitewater code.
There's
So
always the
Charlie,
Gertler
Charlie,
exemption.
well, Charlie, the code just applies to America?
There is a Gertler exemption to the AWA.
You heard it from the man.
Did you go for any swims?
No, I really did mostly easy stuff on this trip. Well, I guess some of those rivers in northern Portugal were pretty good, but I was braver back then, so it was no big deal.
Really nice.
Good.
I would have gone for swims in some of those high ponds. I mean, without the boat.
Well, the good side of going for a swim is that I would have been bathed when Carol got together with me.
Yeah. Poor Carol. But she finally got you in a B&B. That's good.
Yes, that would have been nice.
Talked about this.
I've commented, there's probably quite a few airline drug sniffing dogs that have had to retire after Ed came through. during the trips.
Yes, I've been civilized. Oh, let's see, is there any more comments right here? I would answer some of them later, but these all disappear after the show's over. If I didn't answer any of your questions or something like that, you let me know or speak up. People are being very polite tonight. Oh, goodness. Well, gee, that was a fast show.
Was a great show, Ed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
I'd
lot
like to
of
say
fun.
something
Thank you.
controversial, inject some politics into it.
Do something
was
to
very
rile the
good.
crowd.
You got
It
to
was good to see you.
insult people.
What was that, Charlie?
I think Matt came close to it by asking you if you were safe paddling on your own. He was touching the edges.
Yeah. But did you really want to join me on that 36-mile day?
Not this girl.
Ask Rafa. I think I still have his email.
He did it. He was fine.
Yeah, well, you know, when you're that age, you get over it.
Other than
There's
that
always a
one,
story. You live through it and there's a story.
Right.
other than that one paddler who you paddle with on that long trip, did you run into any other paddlers on those rivers?
Just on the upper Teo or Tagus River. And you know, and another time I would have said, I'm going with you. You know, the thing is, there's an implicit bias against C1s in Europe. They just don't, they haven't been racing really good, but for river cruisers, everybody's a kayaker over there. And so they see you and they just assume you're a turkey. Even back in the 80s, I had to prove myself with anybody I paddle with. The downside was that sometimes I proved myself too much, and then they would put me out front and say, you lead us. So that's made for some exciting trips. So
That's another meeting.
yeah. Well, okay. Well, look, it was good to have you all. And the neat thing is we had this incredible geographical spread here.
We don't want to let you go, Ed. We're enjoying your company. And Carol's too, and everybody else.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Likewise.
Well, we'll be back. And don't
Hi,
forget,
Carol. Are you in Ohio?
Nope, I'm here. I'm just upstairs.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He's down in his little cave there doing his thing.
You did say up here, and I wasn't sure if that meant, you know, geographically, you know.
No, upstairs.
we'll be in Ohio next week.
Yep.
Yeah.
Apple butter.
All right. We all become people of the fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, thanks very much. That was great.
yeah, you're welcome. And thanks for being an audience right here. And don't forget, next month, join us from near
What's the date?
or far.
What date is that?
December the 2nd, the first Friday in December the 2nd.
And that will be
Indeed.
live.
It will be
Well,
live at the Clara Barton Community Center.
Usual. Round up the
usual.
usual suspects.
Thank you.
but the entertainment will be zooming in, so he can zoom in to we live people and get projected on a bigger screen than some of your TV sets that I know you're watching on right now. And for those of you who don't want to come or can't come, we will be making available this Zoom media for you to tune in. But it's going to be really cool. So I can't believe this guy's doing this for little old us. So we need to give him a big audience.
All right. Okay.
Well,
Bye-bye.
congratulations, that's big because it's gotten tough to get together these days.
Yes, it has.
Yes. Well, okay.
All
Let me
right,
do
that's
this
great.
part.
Everybody
This is
applaud.
Thank you. Who kills this first?
I do.
Okay, boss.
See you
I'm
on
keep-
the river.
I'm killing the recording.
Thanks. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks
All right.
very much, Ed.
Good
Bye,
night.
Ed. Good to see you.
Yep.
Thanks, Ed.
Carol, too.
Mhm.